some no man better na phone so abonkomo etra phone so bonkomo dodo ana ana obi so so am friend ne ma mekra enye se bi on na yaka ebi so na ne ma menti ase omo me ko graveyard omo so metre fia reflect ma bibia eye kama the senti e be fa konya kese so now on behalf of HITV and Tataps and in collaboration to say a big happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. All the mothers out there. Sebi ena wato de boa say afa efo bosomenkro na nyame asua no asomdwem na afedie onya badaye atete ne ba eya ahemfo betrasia na achiame no eje aben no anase bi omoje kasamu no mo kasa omo wo accolades bi omo de ma ahemfo na eta eyemesre saso yeme de pa say no fo tabraba amansan enum ano na chese I say obatan a obia enya ne so faso anase na hoden eso obia eso chese obia obefra ne bia no onya adaje edema no na chese no fo tabraba amansan enum ano eno sa na tie sa na ama metie mame ensuno mu beye ne ya if bibi eye ne ba enti abusuafo say if went to me and wish oh me happy Mother's Day na there's a specific reason yes also aka will be say happy Mother's Day no you have out the whole week and celebrate your man na bibi anko so enye come on enche bia ye be kwanya discussing Mother's Day say it was a debate that came up say Mother's Day no ayerenom eka ho bi ana say Mother's Day supposed to be wo eno ma me direct enti say oyere de ewo ho a o ma no be celebrate omo maame was also celebrate o maame enye Mother's Day dey celebrate o sister enye Mother's Day dey celebrate ya dan for ba enye Mother's Day dey celebrate your friend say your year number Mother's Day is specifically allotted and as allocated for mothers. Obviously because say mothers with S apostrophe and I say mothers with apostrophe S. You know S apostrophe no and apostrophe S no no. Monwene ho emepem so mohwe na ya de o se discuss be pepenye bi amana ba betena se na wa cheche mo amai. Mothers wa hanyina yesra mo ye mamu nyina happy Mother's Day and future potential mothers nyina ye mamu nyina so happy Mother's Day. Sabre ye be kwa abofo ma so yase na afide so na afide de you know aseda kesi akomo mo teach you di ho any feel good services when it comes to mental health education and I say opobi amana kasama concerning mental health she feel good services kwan e wo feelgoodservices@gmail.com ebiom almost say wope bia wo de utibeto na bibia akoso kama ama na wonya issue bia na chese ena bia mfa ne ho enkogimodia na feel good services feel good homes ena be kan fa badu abusua enyina no feel good homes say omo building bit ma customize assassin apartment say apartments so and Airbnb for mention kwan e feel good services@gmail.com na and I say from e 513-372-5758 they can book is in etum say surodom. Happy Glow GH say brand baby or cosmetics services whether being facials, eyebrow, eyelash threading, pedicure, manicure, will nails a crown episode. Yeah, more Shaman Estate, right opposite Veggies and Grill. Oswald Wellness LLC say more licenses Maryland, Anna, Ohio. It is open family nurse practitioner, IV hydration, primary care, and I say be a weight management cramp obusonyo mudium koma from 513-268-2740. Yenyo aba say me mama sonte say open licensed professional papa and I say licensed financial professional friend na afidie onini ngita ho Millicent also ɛbɛboa ama biribi akɔ so kama. Say fighting financial ignorance in America. Not just say enyema bebree no moye college fund opama woba and I say bia income protection, flexible work from home business, and that's avoiding the GoFundMe in the community. Basically creating a generational wealth for you, yourself, and your family. Tap send and I saw your snake see pa I did you made ebra with Tata send says Oko App Store, that's a Google Play Store. Download the app no. Now for the follow the prompt and easy steps to go ahead and get yourself set up. We have a promo code HRE and I say PK P-KAY. Esheme amofa PK ni shemu mame dodo why. P-KAY. Odi shemu we are send us a coffee. Obenya $15 bonus on your first transaction. Ebiom Tata Semse or the wallet system number. Our wallet system a dia kutenepa ewo UK enche bia no metrem akọ Europe na afi de ya sane abran ewo han me say which is US and Canada na we asia fa na nyina na yesu yetimi ayi sika e de ato your account mu na ya lock rate na to ho no emra so se ye be sani sika na afi de ye de ko Tata send papa no Ompewe now pedi safe, secured, and very, very durable. Dane abre nyina ne nyama bebre ne de bramo awa mobobo ano. Sabre there's new updater. Last week a call meeting director na or bobo so. Menim say bia aye valid ya ba in ye dim kobo yi obetime bia so akere kama. Sabre yenko ne afede yenko for director brand no be my update from startups and we are na afede ye ne Dr. Boateng Edin Komo. In that topic, no, I told you say, what is in your genes? What's in your genes? Now, genes no, and your genes now will share adequate human nibi no. And I said genes now will share adequate golf nibi no. By a mom no, genes or moja mo. That's any babeka. Nema baby na koso where you read them any bia ye fear ye crapono ye nya aware, but in a yebisia dear na bibia koso one. Director, yama kwaba eba jumede 1 point to say.
Okay, good evening. Bishop good evening. Thanks so much for coming for today's show. Dr. Stephen Boateng, welcome. I'm trained. We need more people to join the show. I know we only have 9 people. But I know it's Monday. Sorry?
Oh, that means wabana minim so ba mo kaso be ba 610 into na minim so wabana.
Right. So, thanks so much for coming. When you said Monday, you guys could be doing anything. And about your mom about lateness. When you said after Mother's Day, but happy Mother's Day to all of you. Mom for more those of us with mothers. Muna, thank you so much. Today's conversation is going to be consistent. When you said Dr. Stephen, what about that? And today we're going to discuss things all genetic. And we're keen to listen. So not to take too much time. It's already 6:10. So I'll give it back to you, Dr. Stephen, if you're ready to take it away. Happy to have you back again. Thank you.
All right, Director, that was it. Doc, up of design.
Yami adum na also.
Yami adum. Where you jamo e wo meeting asin wa ba no. Yeah, hold on to
right on time. Right on time.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. So I bring yeah, to self from you quite ba. This is about the 3rd or 4th time Dr. Stephen Eba and yeah, be doing come on here discuss here about sickle cell on 2 different occasions. That's also near discuss here about ancestry and I say finding the right things to do with Pink Africa, breast cancer, on here discuss cancer, so and then there on here baby din komo ewo near where your genes mu say yeah Paco genes. Mama kai Paco genes, mama musaso. Say yeah Levi and I say a true religion and I say Kuji no. And we'll find out today. Say sergeants near patch that yeah. And yes, and I say a genes for there. Dr. Stephen Boateng, Doc, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think that maybe I can catch the Levi jeans, but I won't even say that. But today,
Levi jeans, most of the commercials also in Tremuda.
Because someone make you scared. Again, I want to say thank you everybody for joining this meeting today. I'm mess with you between, Chi and Bralfo, but senior PK kind and then and Komona Yebedino. It's all about genes. PK, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Let me see. I might actually switch up. But again, the purpose of our conversation today was really just have an honest conversation with one another about your genetics. And to your title, let's say what is in our genes. I think the names that kind, I've been here and I've talked about sickle cell before. One thing I wanted to talk about is usually, whenever I talk about sickle cell, to be quite frank, some people tune out. Some people just might give me the reaction of, oh, wait, the and no, I don't know. But one thing that I usually like to share is that whenever I talk about sickle cell, it actually includes everything. Sickle cell is just one part of a genetic factor, and there's a lot more into our genes and here. Into you're probably wondering what brought about this conversation, right? It's so funny how we ended up having this conversation because, as you can see on my screen, April 25 was actually DNA Day. So DNA Day is one of the days that we celebrate just to bring awareness about the Human Genome Project, which is kind of looked at all the genes that we have as humans, but also bring awareness about genetic testing. That was on April 25. Unfortunately, I think for all of us Ghanaians on this call, we all know that on April 21st, about a few weeks ago, we lost a very big music icon. I put his picture on the right, Koda. Koda is a very popular music icon. And selfishly for myself, I'll tell you all, growing up, I loved his music a lot. And I think when his news broke up, it really inspired me because I started writing this article and I was talking about just genetics because aside how amazing his music was, he actually shared a very important lesson. But I think there was a lot of misinformation about his story and some videos that went out. So we just thought it was important, just all of us have an important conversation. But most importantly, this music icon, I think he also gave us a very, very valuable lesson. He himself being a health advocate for himself. So that's why we wanted to have this conversation today. So like I talked about, I think we all are very familiar with this story, right? After he died and there were different speculations. And, I think what we all came to find out eventually was that he died from, going through kidney transplant, kidney complications. And you're probably like, so why are we talking about that if he died from kidney complications? What stood out to me was when his news broke out, there's a big story about G6PD online and people were misinformed. And some people had misinformation thinking that was the cause of his death, which if you actually go back and read a lot of the news in the story, that wasn't the case. But I think what was very, very important was there was a short video that he was sharing about his experience with medical negligence. For me, I can speak to myself. One thing I always tell people is, I don't care if you're a doctor, a pharmacist, a nurse, whatever you are, nobody on this earth knows it all, whatever specialty you are in. And I think sometimes, because healthcare is so important, sometimes we have to be proactive about our health. And Koda was a prime example of someone who actually stood up for himself in the healthcare field when, there was medical negligence. And so I wanted to just kind of give a preview about the lesson that he taught us from this video, and we'll dive more into our genetics because he became a great advocate. And I think it's important that we all actually just hear some of the lessons that he shared. So I'm going to play this snippet video. And PK, let me know if you all can hear the sound. But I just wanted all of us to listen to this brief story that he had shared. And I think it went all online. I think it's important that we all recenter ourselves about this story. So take a quick listen.
Why am I being given medication that contains sulfur if I'm just a speedy? Because you know that we are not supposed to be taking these things, and you guys are aware about these things. To cut a long story short, all they said was, "Oh, sorry, oh. I'm serious." And then by being a bit defensive, I don't know, I remember exactly who, but somebody who was part of the medical whole team that was taking care of me said, I also work with school. And so what does the mona say? Why don't you talk about it? Hey, and all of a sudden, it was like some blame shifting was coming into the thing that, hey, I am old enough to know when I'm being given wrong medication. Then I said, hey, Simon. So this was my resolve since that day. I will not disrespect nurses or disrespect pharmacists. I will not disrespect doctors. But I can't take your word for it anymore. When I'm given something, I want to Google it myself. I want to find out. When I come and sit in front of you, I will not be quiet. I will talk. I will tell you that, hey, my guy, I'm just speedy. I pray you're not giving me anything that will harm me. I'm not supposed to be on. And it will sound like, yes, you are being all over the place. You are being too known, as we used to say in my primary school, you are getting the thing that you are getting the thing. But it will save me from being a guinea pig. Sorry for the use of the word pig came up. Oh, that's nice. It will save me from being a guinea pig and from you just telling me at the end of the day that, oh, I am sorry.
So I wanted to kind of pause this video here because I think the lessons that he shared was so important. Hopefully you all can still hear me. But one of the things that he talked about, just to summarize, right? So this happened in 2015, just to give context to everybody. Happened in 2015, where he had gone to the hospital because he wasn't feeling well for a different reason. And they had given him some medicine. And so he started taking the medicine and he had gone back. He went back to, do his research because he felt like the medicine that he was taking was actually not making him feel right. So he went back and asked a couple of questions like, hey, doctors, I think I have G6PD and I'm not supposed to take this medicine. And from kind of how this whole thing played out, the doctors were not too pleased about it. And they started pretty much blaming him. But I think what was so important, he made a comment. He said, this was my resolve. His resolve was that, especially in our Ghanaian culture, sometimes, so Kasai, if you speak up, some people might think you're too knowing or you think you know it all. But that was him talking about the importance of being our own self-health advocates, right? So whether we might be seen as being too known or speaking too much, because of the knowledge that he had about his own genetic inheritance, he was able to speak up for himself, but most important, actually stop taking the medicine that potentially could have even harmed him more. I think sometimes, as we know, sometimes our medical system isn't the most kind, and there's medical negligence that goes. Sometimes some of these things can actually be very, very dangerous and serious. So for me, I have so much respect for Koda as a musician because I love his music, but I have an extra admiration for him, and may he so rest in peace, because he was able to really advocate for his health and stood up for himself, in the midst of discomfort when some of these doctors thought he was being too knowing or he was probably just talking too much. So I just thought this part was so important, just to kind of give context to what we are discussing today. And I'm going to kind of continue our conversation by just giving a little bit, brief summary of what G6PD is. I think there was a lot of misinformation once he passed away, unfortunately, about some people were even assuming that it was G6, it was his, G6PD that had caused his death, which wasn't the right case. So I am struggling to pull that
you mean the
back
kidney
again. Can you hear me?
You mean the kidney, rather? People were thinking it was the kidney that caused the death, right?
No. I think a lot of people were thinking it was G6PD related. I mean, ultimately, it was he had a kidney transplant and couldn't make it after that because he had complications from the kidney transplants. When you read a lot more, I think that was ultimately what caused
so people rather think say GCP the mom they cause it. Oh,
exactly.
Okay. I was also thinking the same. I thought say people were actually thinking it was the kidney.
Yeah,
that
so
caused the
there was a lot of people that had kind of that misinformation about what actually causes death. I get it. Like whenever news comes out, I think because of this video, that's kind of why a lot of people were reacting so early, and people didn't realize this was a story he was sharing that happened to him in 2015. And to give some color to it, someone had actually was asking him a question on his show about, it's about the Bible, like, eating meat. What kind of meat should people eat? And he actually used that to teach a lesson, to talk to people about the fact that ultimately it's up to you and what you think is right. And sometimes you have to speak up for yourself. That was a lesson that he was trying to teach. And that's kind of what came out of that. So, PK, let me know. Can you see my screen now?
I see just you.
Just me? Okay, hold on. Let me see. There it is. Awesome. You should see it now.
Yes.
Okay, full screen. Perfect. Okay, so for the rest of this meeting, I just wanted to give a brief summary just to help level set all of us about this G6PD, right? Because I think from Coda's story and him talking about him being G6PD deficient, there was a lot of misinformation about it. The first thing I want to talk about is that G6PD, it's a genetic condition. That is really the premise of our conversation today, right? We're talking about what's in our genes, the things that we inherit. And so G6PD, it actually stands for glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, right? It's an enzyme that all of us carry. So people that actually have G6PD, it's actually the correct term is G6PD deficient, which is where they might not have enough of that enzyme. So you probably might wonder,
why is it the same as GCPD? Because I see GCPD on the tab.
GC6 or C? Oh, right here?
Yeah.
Okay, that was my abbreviation error, but actually the focus here is 6. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
So to PK's point, this is an enzyme that we all have, right? So the reason why this is important is that whenever we eat or whenever our bodies go through different cell processes, ultimately we need this enzyme to kind of, for lack of a simplifying term, it helps clean up stuff so that our red blood cells can function properly, right? So there's so many, we term it in science, it's called reactive oxygen species. Whenever your cells go through processes, this is kind of a byproduct that are kind of just hanging around in the body. And so we need these G6PD enzymes to kind of help clean things up. Now, what I will share is that there are other things in our body that helps with that cleanup process, right? So sometimes, even if you might not have enough G6PD, there are other elements in our body that can help clean up all of those reactive oxygen species. Now, what becomes a challenge for people that have G6PD deficiency is it is very, very trigger driven. And so even though they might not have enough, typically, everything is fine, but under certain triggers, that can actually result in those red blood cells, as you see on the screen, they actually will break down very fast. And it's something called hemolytic anemia. And that's something you don't want, because if you want your red blood cells to break down faster than it should, that can lead to some severe complications. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is, one of the cardinal symptoms or things that happen from G6PD is called hemolytic anemia. Sometimes too, for people, when they get those triggers, they can get jaundice or dark colored urine. I'm going to explain why all those things happen. They can feel fatigue and pale sometimes. The heart rate can go high, and sometimes the spleen. And some of the triggers that can cause all of these symptoms to happen is what you see on the right hand of the screen. The funny thing is, one of the most common triggers is actually food. It's a popular type of beans that actually, for people with G6PD, when they eat it, it's like the body is overreacting to kind of break all these foods down and can cause that. The other ones, which is Coda had talked about, some medications. There are some medications that for people that are G6PD deficient, when they take these medications, it actually forces the red blood cells to break down faster than they should. And so along with that, infection can also trigger it. So anything that can cause extra stress to the body can actually cause our red blood cells to break down faster than it should. So that's kind of the key takeaway that I want all of us to remember. And the other important question, again, thinking about our conversation today, is what's in our genes, right? So the big question is, who is typically affected, who typically gets G6PD deficiency. And the known fact is that it actually tends to be more common in people with ancestry from sub-Saharan Africa, the Mediterranean, and Southeast Asia. And as far as statistics, globally, there's about 400 to 500 million people who have G6PD deficiency. And 30% of children that are born, whenever they are born, if you see significant jaundice, sometimes that could be a sign of G6PD deficiency. And it also tends to happen more in males than females. So my question to the group, I want to learn. I'm just curious. Does anybody want to take a guess as to why we might tend to see G6PD deficiency happening more in sub-Saharan Africa? And think about our red blood cells. I'll be curious to learn from anybody. If anybody has any thoughts around that. I'll look in the chat if someone wants to say it or type it in.
I was saying anyone call more.
PK is like, let me just move on. So I want to share this. I think it's important, right? Because I think the concept of genetics, sometimes when we're talking about it, people don't want to embrace it. There are some genetic factors that happen. A big reason is because of malaria. So, usually when I talk about...
I was about to say malaria.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Okay. So usually when I try to explain to people about sickle cell, it's also one of those things where malaria is a big factor. So as we all know, when you think about malaria, right, what do malaria parasites love? They love blood. Blood is their go-to. And so when we think about evolution and genetic mutation, because malaria is common in that region where we're all from, the way our bodies were trying to fight malaria is a couple of different ways, and G6PD is one of them. So as I talked about earlier, that hemolytic anemia, or when those red blood cells break down very fast, is a cardinal symptom. And so whenever someone gets infected with malaria, the idea and the goal behind G6PD was that those malaria parasites, they need those red blood cells to thrive. So when you get bitten by a mosquito, the plasmodium gets into your blood, it needs that red blood cell to get its nutrients and oxygen. Our bodies found out about that. So what our body is doing is they're going to break those red blood cells up very fast. So when the body breaks down those red blood cells, it exposes everything, including the malaria parasite, and the malaria dies, which is a good thing. But the side effect of that too is now you can have hemolytic anemia. So this is kind of one of the many reasons why you tend to see some of these genetic factors happening more common in the regions where we are from. Again, speaking to the high volume and importance for why, especially for where we're from, it's important for us to just know what type of genetic traits that we're more likely to carry. The other thing that is important for us to know is, as you can see at the bottom, I have the XX chromosome and the XY chromosome. So XY of course being male and XX being female. G6PD is one that actually tends to happen more in males, more so than females. It's something called a recessive gene. That's why you tend to see it in males more commonly. I think the key takeaway here I want everybody to remember is that for most people, they actually do not know that they might be carrying this, because most of the time it's very dormant unless some triggers happen. So one of my things is, again, from this coded story, like I said, he really thought it's a good lesson of how he was able to stand up against those doctors who pretty much ignored him and gave him a medicine that could have really become very, very severe. He became a big healthcare advocate. So for me, this is one thing I strongly believe. I really believe that our overall health is not only impacted by external lifestyle, but also what we inherit. Because most of the time, see, it's healthcare, because eat healthy. We're always talking about diabetes, hypertension, which is fair, which is a good point, right? We talk about, hey, make sure we're eating a well-balanced meal, make sure we're eating fruits and vegetables, make sure we're exercising. The one thing that we usually don't talk about a lot is make sure we also know the genetic traits and genes that we inherit. That also impacts our health. And so I think it is important that we have this conversation. And that is why I wanted to spend the rest of the time to just talk about our genetics overall and kind of help all of us just understand and appreciate what we all inherit. And so, again, the topic of our conversation today is just understanding what's in our genes. What do we inherit, right? So as far as genetics, I'm going to give like a quick genetics 101. The key factor is that we need to understand that whenever we are conceived, we are inheriting a copy of our genes from each parent. So our mother is going to give us some type of genetic makeup, and our dad is going to give us some type of genetic makeup. And together, that is what ultimately becomes our DNA, right? Or our genetic code. I think that is something that we all need to understand, because I think, again, not G6PD or anything. There's so many different genetic factors that we don't talk about. But I think what's important is whether it's our hair color, our eye color, sickle cell trait, sometimes even some cancer genes. All of these things are things that we can inherit from our parents. And it's important that we know what we're inheriting from our parents. Just like our brother Coda shared, him knowing that he carried the G6PD pretty much saved his life in 2015 because he was able to stop taking a medicine that was contraindicated or not recommended for someone like him. So the one thing that I think a lot of the time, sometimes we all confuse ourselves with whenever we're talking about genetics is the fact that someone says gene, someone says chromosome, someone says DNA. What are all of these different factors? And so my key takeaway that I think everybody should learn about, I'm going to use a pointer. Hopefully you all can see it. Can you see this pointer, PK, on my screen?
Yes, I definitely see.
You might be gone away, but hopefully you all can see my pointer here.
Can you hear me?
Whenever we inherit each. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I kept talking, but apparently couldn't hear me. Yes, I can see your screen.
You see this? Do you see my pointer?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
The green and the blue on the side.
Yes. I have this little pencil thing on the screen, just trying to point to some things over here.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that's important is we all need to understand that when we inherit each of those genes from our parents, right? That's really what becomes our genetic makeup. Now, our bodies are so smart that it will actually package all of those genes that we're inheriting and put it in this thing, like it looks like this X here. That's what becomes a chromosome, right? So it's kind of coiled around, put together, so it can fit. It can fit in a little circle in the cells that we call our nucleus. And so this is what ultimately becomes our genetic makeup. And as we all probably know or may not know, which I'm going to share on the next slide, is we ultimately end up having 23 copies of these chromosomes. So as you can see on my screen, we inherit something from each of our parents. They all get bundled up. They get put in a circle or in the chromosome, and those chromosomes is what ends up in our DNA. So whenever someone is getting tested, that is what was being looked for. And all of these different chromosomes tell a story about a person. So if I look at, the most common one, like we can all talk about, is number 23. 23 is what helps determine if someone is going to be male or female. And also for any other genetic condition that are sex linked, that is where we're inheriting that from. So something like G6PD, it's a sex linked chromosome. So you tend to see that G6PD, like I said, more common on the X chromosome. So it can come from here or there. So each of these chromosomes that we have in our body tells a story. And I think the sad truth is most of the time, we're not even aware of what all of these are. I talk a lot about sickle cell, like I talk about people knowing their genotype. If you go on number 11 tells a lot about sickle cell and all these different things. When you talk about blood group, if you go to number 9, it can tell a lot about blood group A, B, O, all of those different types. If you go to number 6, some people are born with type 1 diabetes. This is how they do those genetic testing to figure out that specific chromosome. So I could go on and on and on and talk about all of these genetic factors. But my key thing here I want everyone to remember is that whether we like it or not, we've inherited specific genes from our parents. And it is important that at least we know, just so we can be proactive about our health, because each of these can help us with our health. And if we know it, that can actually help us be proactive about our health. That can also help us in cases where we encounter healthcare providers who might not spend the time to want to know all of those questions. For me, in a perfect world, I think every doctor, nurse, pharmacist, you name it, PA, nurse practitioner, I think whenever we all come in contact with patients, we should be asking about the patient's genetic risk or factor. But sometimes doctors don't ask, healthcare providers don't ask. That's why I think it's important that we all know what we're inheriting. So why should we know our genetic genes? I think I've said a lot of it, right? The key things here is that knowing our genetics can actually help diagnose some diseases. Sometimes it can also help us predict how severe a condition is. Like I talked about, for someone knowing they have G6PD, that can actually help them just be aware and know that, okay, I have G6PD. Now, if I go to the hospital, if they give me some medicines, I can always ask them about that. If I have this sickle cell trait, maybe I'm not going to have any complications, but I also know that maybe if I have a child with someone also with sickle cell trait, we might have a child with sickle cell disease. If I have a genetic trait for type 1 diabetes, that means that maybe my children can always inherit that. So actually just knowing our genetics, what we are inheriting, can actually help us a lot with diseases. And it's not only disease and medical conditions too. Sometimes knowing that too actually helps us, especially in the medical sense. Sometimes we do genetic testing to help us figure out what drug is going to work best for a patient. There are some drugs that are designed specifically to target specific genes. And so when you know what genes you have, that can actually help you. One of my favorite stories back in school was there was a study that was done, and it actually showed that this is not necessarily the Black population, but in the Asian population, there's a specific gene that some of them inherit. And because of that gene, there's some type of drugs that when they take, that drug doesn't break down. And so if you and I take the same drug, I think they're called proton pump inhibitors. If you and I take that proton pump inhibitor, maybe after 5 to 6 days, right? I'm just assuming those numbers, that drug can clear out of my system. But for this Asian population that had this specific gene, when they take that medicine, drug just stays in them for a lot longer, and that can actually cause worsening side effects. So again, them knowing those genetic factors is one reason why a doctor might be able to say, hey, for this specific medicine, you're not going to get it. For this specific medicine, you might be able to get it. So again, there's so many benefits for us knowing our genetics, and I think it is important that we become aware. The big question that I always talk about is a lot of people don't know things that they inherit from a genetic standpoint, not because they don't want to. It's a big health disparity issue. So I want to give a big quick context, right? So for those of us here in the US, one thing I can share with you is newborn screening is something that is very popular now, right? So as you see on the screen, most of the time now, whenever a baby is born, they'll prick the heel of the baby, grab some blood, and they'll go do all these different genetic testing and figure out what did that child inherit from their parent. Now, what I can share with you, especially in my hematology world, is that up until the early 2000s, the genetic testing that was required, it was actually not mandated across all states. So not every state mandated genetic testing specifically for sickle cell and other factors to be done across all states. So the one thing I share a lot of people is that I'm pretty sure most of us on this call know somebody who was born before the 2000s, me included. And so if you're born before the 2000s, there's a chance that some of these genetic tests were not done, not because you didn't want to, because the healthcare system didn't prioritize a lot of those things. So that's why for most people now, we may want to go back and do some of these different genetic testing to really understand what we inherit. I remember back in Ghana, the only way most people will find out about specific genes they inherit is maybe their grandma will tell them, oh, this gene is in our family. And that's how people know. But newborn screening is not nationwide in Ghana, to be honest with you. There's a couple of hospitals that we've been able to do some great work. Some of my friends and colleagues that I know that newborn screening is recommended. Not everywhere. There's a lot of babies that are born that we have no idea what they inherited. And sometimes later on in life, they might find out, and sometimes those things can be very damaging if it's a disease they inherited. So again, that is why it's important. So I want to end my conversation today, and let's talk about resources. What's in our genes? How can we know? What type of tests are available? The one I always talk about is the first step, if you're able to, is have a conversation with your primary care provider and ask them, hey, I don't know what my genetics are as far as disease inheritance. Can I do a test to know it? I usually tell a lot of patients that ask me, just add it to your annual physical, right? Most people that are doing annual physicals, they're checking for their heart rate, their blood pressure, their weight, their height. And I always say it doesn't hurt. Ask them. They can do a full electrophoresis. They can do different genetic testing. They can recommend you to a genetic counselor and do all those tests to help you at least know. There is so much power in us just knowing. And so the one of the most common ones that you see on the left here is usually you go in a hospital, you ask for the test, and they'll get a full blood sample and do all these different genetic tests on you. Now, most of the time, these tests, they're going to look specifically for the chromosome that have disease risk, right? They're not going to look for everything. But these days, there are other tests on the market that people are doing from a genetic standpoint. And I have the 23andMe one here as an example that you can actually run, and it will tell you a whole lot about your genetics. All people do is they, using saliva, and they use those cells and they can tell the DNA and kind of pretty much run that whole test to let people know. So there is options. I get it. Not everyone might have the resources to be able to, but I think the key thing here is that it's never too late to just know your genetics. Even if you know you don't have any disease and you're fine, you're moving on just okay, you might be carrying some genetic trait that maybe you might need to pass on to your child and you may never know. Or it might sometimes be in some cases too. It's not just about diseases, right? Just knowing our genetics just tells us a lot about different things beyond diseases too. Like I shared earlier, some people might know their genetics and that can tell if a drug is going to work good in you or not. That can tell if for certain foods, if you eat it, are you going to have an allergic reaction to it or not? So there's so many benefits for us just knowing what we inherit and what genes. So one of the things I want to end my conversation today, I think I've shared it before and I will always share it. There's so many different tests out there. As part of my work at Sickle Cell 101, we did this partnership with 23andMe, and we help provide free testing for people that want to know. That's a keyword. People that want to know, there's the option where they can opt in to request a free test to know their genotypes. Some of them can tell about your genetic health risk. Some can tell about your pharmacogenetics. Some people are like, what is pharmacogenetics? That's pretty much what I shared earlier. This your genetic factors that influence how drugs work on your body. And then sometimes it can tell about your carrier status, right? We talk about G6PD, sickle cell trait, some people with cystic fibrosis. There's so many other medical conditions that just doing some of these genetic testing can help you. It's not only 23andMe. There's other genetic tests out there. I think the key thing is just knowing that there's different options out there you can research and look into. But for us, we have this option where for people that want to know, again, this is US specific, you can always opt in and you can be given this test. One thing I always like to share too is that, there's a lot of different genetic testing out there these days. I always tell my patients and the people that reach out to me is always think about safety as well, right? And so one of the things I share people is if you opt in for a genetic testing, always remember that this is all electronic, right? Data is out there. So make sure you're protecting the account that you built. Just also make sure you're asking the questions that you might be curious about, right? If you're doing a test, just ask all those key questions and always look for whatever company you're using. Look for their privacy and security checkup. Some of them might have it just to make sure they protect you. Some of them might not. I think it's always important that we protect our safety. And the last thing I want to say is, one thing about 23andMe, I always look at that and I'm like, what are these companies doing to improve their test? One of the things that BRCA is a type of gene it correlates with breast cancer. It's one type of gene that people can inherit. They can tell the risk of some types of breast cancer. And the way that 23andMe has evolved is they now actually include a higher amount of people who are from African-American descent. I think that is important because now if you know these genetic testing, if it's not representing where you're from, I think sometimes you might have some questions too. So always make sure before you sign up for any genetic testing, you do a lot more research, ask all the questions. If it's an online resource, make sure that you understand the safety and privacy. Use passwords to protect it, just so your data is not out there. I think the key thing is, yes, we want to know our genetics too, but we also don't want to make sure that people are taking advantage of us. That's the key lesson too. So before I end this conversation, here's one thing I want everybody to remember. One thing that I share with people is, like Koda's story, like he said, he had to go talk to the doctors, and the doctors were like, well, if you knew there was something wrong with you, why didn't you tell us? That was so frustrating to me, seen as a healthcare provider. This is what I tell my patients. I tell them whenever you're prescribed a medicine or you're given a test, anything, one question that you can ask that I think sometimes can save all of us is always ask the doctor, the nurse, the pharmacist, whoever, is there any type of people that you would recommend they don't take this medicine? Is there any type of individuals that you recommend they don't take this type of test? When you ask that question, you force that healthcare provider to think a lot more deeper. Because sometimes they're not. Let's be honest, nobody's perfect. They're not proactively thinking. So if you're giving me a medicine that I know that, let's say I have G6PD or whatever it is, and I know what my G6PD is. And if I didn't tell the doctor, if I don't ask him, hey, doctor, thank you for this medicine, are there any group of people that may have a genetic condition or any group of people that you know shouldn't take this medicine? That can force that doctor to go do that research for you before they tell you the answer. Because if they say, oh, everybody can take it, and you go back and you go take the medicine, you have your side effect, now you can actually file your claims and, the medical negligence can actually be taken to the next step too. So I always tell everybody, just make sure whenever, it doesn't matter whether you know your genetics or not, anytime you're given any medicine or any test, always ask this question. Is there any group of people that you would recommend they don't take this medicine? They don't take this test? I think that question is so, so important that we should always have in our back pocket. I don't care if the doctor is a professor emeritus or whatever it is. Nobody knows it all. We should always ask them questions. So I saw this picture on the 23andMe page, and it was so funny. They said, those jeans look good on you. I think it was one of their campaigns they used earlier. I thought it was so funny. But I added my own little nugget because I said, only when you know. If you don't know the genes, then what's the point, right? And so I think, again, it's important that we know our genetics just so we can take charge of our health and understand the things that we might have inherited from our parents. While it might not show, it could also impact our future generations too. So wanted to just talk about this again. Thank you all for listening to this conversation and helping all of us learn and empower ourselves. There are some genetic conditions that for of us from African descent, we tend to have higher chances of those. And it's important that we learn about it. And I have some links here for Sickle Cell 101 for the work I do there and also for my foundation that you all want to reach out. You can always reach out if you have any questions. I'm more than willing to answer. But that's where I want to end the conversation today. And I want to open it up so we can have a good dialogue and conversation and discussion too. So I'll stop sharing, PK, and see if there are any questions that have come through.
All right. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, thank you very much for such a beautiful breakdown. But I do have some questions for you.
Uh-oh.
So, and please, if you guys have questions, go ahead and throw your questions out and I will stop mine and ask yours because you guys, let me say, your questions are more important than mine. I mean, Muntini, yeah, sure. No. But whilst we're waiting for, and also if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, you can put a reaction button up, put your hands up, and I will let you speak. But if you want to just unmute yourself, go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name, and I will pause. Then you can come in. So with the G6PD, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't like men? I mean, men can use the word mandatory. Not say for lack of better words. No, is it something that if you have it, automatically can pass on to your son?
No, it's not automatic.
And you're automatic.
So it's not automatic. So that's a great question. That's why, again, it's important that we know what we inherit, right? So one thing I like to share with people is this things that I think is important we know. Like I said earlier, G6PD, it's called an X-linked recessive condition. And all that means is that males are more likely to have G6PD because
so talking about males are more likely. I actually heard that females cannot have it. Can they still have it?
They can inherit it. So keep in mind, right? Females have two X chromosomes, right? And males, we are the ones who have both the X and the Y, right? Mm-hmm. And so because we have those two, so the way I like to think about it, it's less common in females because when a female has two X chromosomes, let's say if she carries one of it on the X, she can give the other X that doesn't have it to the kid, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're a male, guess what? You only have one X. So if you have it on an X, you don't have the option to not pass that X on. So that's why it's more common to see it in males than females, but it doesn't mean females can never get it.
Okay. All right. Josephine has a hands up. I'll let her
Hi,
speak
Josephine.
because she's in Ghana right now. So I'll let her speak first. Then after that, I'll continue my question. Joe, go ahead.
Hi, how you doing, Doc? How you doing?
I'm doing awesome.
My question is, I was born before the early 2000s, like you mentioned, and I never even thought about doing a genetic testing because I just thought knowing your blood group was good enough.
Mhm.
But with the education that you dropped today, my question is, working with 23andMe, do you feel strongly about working with 23andMe?
That's $1 million question, Josephine. That's $1 million question. So here's what I always say. I don't think that one test has all the answers, but at least one test can give some of the answers, right? So for me, in a perfect world, I would always say, number one, for all my patients, go get an electrophoresis, because those electrophoresis, the ones that are done in the hospitals, some are like spectrophotometry too. They will tell you a lot about your test. And I love your question, Josephine, because let me explain this way. You know how I explained there's all these 23 chromosomes, right? A lot of the tests that we have, what the tests are doing is they're going to look at specific chromosomes. So they're not going to look at every chromosome. There are some chromosomes that tell me about the risk of a disease, right? So, like if I look at, I think it's chromosome 15, like chromosome 15 tells me about the eye color of someone. They're not going to waste time looking at that chromosome because all he's doing is telling me about the eye color of someone. So they're going to go to the specific ones that talk about diseases, right? So if you do an electrophoresis, of course you can know about sickle cell, genotype, sometimes they even have blood type, all the different variants of hemoglobins in there. So that's going to tell me a little bit more. Now, with the 23andMe's and all these other they're called the sequencing tests that are available. They're looking at all the chromosomes, right, to find the likelihood of a condition. So I think if that's what's available, at least it's going to tell me, give me some answers. And some of them, I'll tell you, Josephine, to end my answer, sometimes all they're going to tell you is they're going to give you enough to want to go learn more. So we did a program in Nigeria a while back. They have this test over there. I won't say the name of the company. And the way the test is it can actually give you false positive and false negative, but it can react, right? So for the patients that were in this program, unfortunately, we couldn't get electrophoresis to them. When they take that test and it reacts, it tells the healthcare provider there's something in there, right? And if there's something in there, that type of patient would say, hey, we'll help you with some money. Now go do a follow-up test, and they'll go do an electrophoresis. So I guess my long way of saying is I think 23andMe, they've continuously tried to improve their resources. It's never perfect. I know there's been some safety concerns in the past as well, but at least it will help give us some answers that we can always inquire more.
So I can go to my PCP and request to get an electrophoresis done for me. Correct?
Always. A lot of doctors might even push back. I'll tell you my own story, Josephine. When I moved to the US, I didn't know all my genetic stuff. And so when I was going through school, that's kind of where I was like, I want to know. I can't just be learning all this medicine stuff and pharmacy, all of that, and not know. My health provider pushed back on me 3 times because it's one of those tests where it's like optional. They don't have to recommend it. And he's like, why do you want to know? So sometimes you have to be like a self-advocate and tell them, hey, I want to know because I want to understand X, Y, and Z. And some insurance might even push back on it.
But why is it your problem? I want to know. Why you ask me why do I want it? Like I don't get it.
I hate to tell you, sometimes it comes down to money and reimbursement.
Okay.
Yeah. So but it doesn't, I tell people it shouldn't stop you. You can keep fighting for it. And I think hopefully if you told me what's your perfect world, I always say I wish there's a world where everybody can get access to all these free tests because we all deserve it. It's not just fair. Good question, Josephine.
Thank you, Doc.
You're welcome.
All right. So there is a question in the chat box. Gina said, how is it defined? Is it by blood test, behind full blood test or specifically requested for GCSPD to be deterred in UK?
Okay.
She said I'm in UK. Yeah.
I'm reading it too. I think Gina is trying to understand, like, is it a blood test or because some tests can use saliva samples, all of that.
Gotcha.
Either. I always say blood is always like, the gold standard. And now a lot of these genetic testing, all you need is saliva sample and they can pull that DNA. So there's all those options. I would say in the UK, sometimes some testing recommendations might take a little bit longer in the UK because they have that healthcare system is very different in the US with reimbursement. So you might just have to figure out which ones will reimburse you from your insurance before you select it. That's a good question.
All right. Any more question? Then after that, I can. Whilst we're waiting on the questions, I have another question. So this flavor beans thing, right? It's severe and people don't get to even tell because there are a lot of beans that look like the flavor beans. So I for one, I would say if you know you do have GCSPD, just don't eat those beans. Those peas that we put on. Sometimes they'll be on your jollof, then the beans are on it. If you think you have it, or no, if you know you have it for a fact, just don't do it because the side effect is pretty much death. It can kill you if you really take those sulfur medications. And aspirin, another big medication you cannot take because if you have GCSP, then you take aspirin, it will get you. Tylenol, Cramponol, I will shy away from Tylenol because there's a minute percentage of sulfur in there that can get you too. So I'm more or less like a big ibuprofen guy, and I don't mind putting out there. I'm a GCSPD deficient, and I didn't know that till I joined the military, right? I didn't know that. And when they ran my blood test and they brought it up, it was like, hey, you GCSPD, you have the choice to get kicked out or still serve, but that's your call. And I was like, what is it? What does it do? At that point, it was you see that most people scared about is, me with HIV, more away. But any other thing, I was ready to ride with it. And I saw 3 guys that were to my left and to my right that actually got kicked out. And I was like, why are they getting kicked out? Oh, we were asthma. We were. And I was like, is this something that can kill this? Like, it can. But then the thing is, you burn more glucose or energy than most people. So you're going to get tired more. Like, you have to do twice more to keep up with a normal person. And if that is something that you really want to run with it, just run with it. I was like, let's do it. If me and my sign, but again, I did cadet back in Ghana, and we were trained by the Ghana Air Force, and everything that we went through, and the kind of boarding house that we went through. All my life, I've never done anything and felt like, I'm falling short, from the normal person. So I didn't see how that can deter me from pushing forward with it. But then, casting my mind back, I realized that when I almost died at the age of 10 or 12, it probably was the cause of that. Because I remember I had some severe malaria and chloroquine, and chloroquine was the #1 negative medication to take as GCSPD. And all of a sudden, like, I was off, till I saw this nurse, and she gave me sugar water and prayed over it, and that was it. And she was like 2 houses away from my house. So we have to come out of the house to rush me there for face aid before sending me to Achimota Hospital. The point I'm trying to make is this is not something you want to take lightly. It's serious. It kills more than even people that have sickle cell. So if you think of people with sickle cell now, you want to look down upon them and you have GCSPD, you're wrong, because this is equally as worse that can get you dead if you really think so. And I'll just have any lifestyle and walk around. And it all boils down to that. So I just want to put that when I heard Koda's video, right? Me, I'm shaming because I realized this is the reason why most people actually having some kidney issues, because now because think about it, kidney issues like well, I understand the uncontrolled high blood pressure can get you there, but at the same time, you taking those medications now, your body is not breaking down, your liver, your kidney is at risk, and it can really get you to a place that will be very, very
and your spleens too. That's one
exactly.
People don't talk about.
It's horrible.
Some of these medicines you talked about, like a lot of NSAIDs like ibuprofen, those are mostly going through our kidneys. kidneys are doing extra work. So I love what you shared. The key thing here is knowing. There's so much. We all said knowledge is power. Health knowledge, man, it's extra power. I'm not even kidding. That's important. So thank you. Sulfur is in a lot of foods, drugs, and even red wine. Gina said that. Gina, I couldn't agree with you more. PK said Tylenol, and I was laughing because when you do a lot of some of these drugs, a lot of them metabolize, they break down, and they can have a sulfur component. So it's important to know that.
Yep.
So I think, as we go through this conversation, I think for me, the key here is for all of us to embrace and know it's okay to just know what we inherit, right? I think I tell people all the time, especially the African environment we grew up in. This is my mom. My mom says it's by grace. It's a lot of things that are happening literally by grace because people don't know. And sometimes we luck out of it. Some people don't luck out of it. And I think if we have the resources and the means I think it's important that we take charge of our health by knowing anything that we inherit. I think it's important.
Yes, sir. I think so. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad people are actually, paying attention to that because this is something severe that we can't joke about.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions, please?
I'm looking in the chat too. I don't see any. I want to also remind people that, like I said, you might face an uphill battle with different healthcare providers. I'll say it a million times. We don't know it all. And so as you're going through your own journey, I tell people all the time, a lot of my patients, I say your experience is your expertise, right? Sometimes there are things that you're experiencing that on paper in a lab, it might not make sense to a doctor, a lawyer, a pharmacist, or even a nurse. It doesn't mean you can't advocate for yourself. I love what Koda said. He said, this was my resolve. I can't take your word for it. It's important we listen to recommendations, but also do our own homework and make sure that anything that might be prescribed to us or everything that's shared with us, it matches with what we think is going on. And then anytime we don't feel anything is right with our body too, we have to step up and be able to speak up about it. Because for him, I think that time, him being able to literally, he Googled stuff and that's how he found out and made that connection too. So please advocate for your health. And if you didn't take anything at all from our conversation today, I just have one question for you. What's in your genes?
That's smart. I'm gonna take this chance to actually read some comments from Facebook, and if there is nothing, then I think there's one more comment. So basically, everyone should test for GCSPD as it can affect anyone. I strongly believe because think about it, right? I for one didn't know. Now, whether my parents knew no man can share me, and I say, yeah, I think so if they knew, they would have told me because they might be mom. But again, I come from a home whereby whatever you do, whatever you eat is very strict. What I said with my SDA background, there are a lot of things that, and I also have that kind of vibe. Said, when I go outside, I don't want to eat it because I don't know what is made with it. Until say if a jollof no be didi, I made DB because you did jollof for fear, a benqua made DB, a fufu made DB, barrier made DB. But fan say yeah, all the quarter I am quite Mindy quarter that into I don't see why I should come eat it. Say be all the kind of beans be I and as the beans then in your cocoa, then a fita and then a greener. I've not had that in my house. So that could also be another way I kind of help me not to get involved in something. But they may feel and say, regardless of the situation, when you know now, it shapes the way I did this so and I drove you so I better because growing up now, our first aid box, nobody was allowed to go to the Facebook box. This is me and Papa. So then it's like they go get it and they'll probably give you that first aid. And if, after 3 days it doesn't work, okay, you go to hospital. And I say, I'm a Samai just to because we lived in the Taifa area or Fanko area. So it's like basically, those were the two main hospitals you can just, get yourself, taken care of. But I feel say you should know because wow at the long run and it will stop you from getting yourself involved in anything that you're not supposed to. Let me try to pull some comments up. and see what people have said. And it's thank you so much for sharing this with us, because you have no idea some people who have actually been saved by doing the right thing when it comes to GCSP. Okay, so it looks like say everybody's questions are pretty much doing well, and people are good with the response. So I might as well just have you give us your final words, or Richard today. Richard say, YouTube for more fan check me why they be I'm focused on the Facebook. Richard Amoa says sometimes the too known could also cause your own demise. Since we are all making assumptions, he made a comment that he would not take doctors' words anymore. Could it be maybe he sued after another medical advice, and due to the fact that he doesn't trust doctors anymore, he researched and led on his own?
Let me comment on that. I'll disagree with that. So here's what I'll say. I think if you watch the full length of the video, he starts by saying that he's not going to disrespect healthcare providers, but he can't always take their word for it, right? That was a key word over there. And I will say, I mean, from kind of digging a little bit to kind of learn about, his recent passing and his wife donating her kidneys and all of that, what you will learn is actually he's a big believer in the healthcare system that helped him with his kidney transplant and all of that. I think the message there was making sure that whenever we go into the healthcare setting, we should be proactive about asking questions, right? Of course, nobody knows it all. And I think the way that most of us are raised, right? I'm sure most of us will agree. We're raised not to ask questions. That's how most of us are. Like, we're raised not to step up and ask questions. And I think that we need to embrace that culture of being able to ask questions. I can ask a question to learn. I tell people all the time, I can't go to my financial advisor and tell them how to do their job, right? Same thing. I think we can't go to a healthcare provider and tell them how to do their job, but we can go in. And someone has a question. I just dive in. I'll talk about it in a minute. We can go into the healthcare provider with our own tools and resources to start with the questions we want to ask. If you don't share, when you go to a doctor's office, the first question we always ask, we taught in school, is you have to get a patient's past medical history, right? Most people are not asking about genetic risk. So I think for him, his message there was us being proactive about our health. And we have to trust the healthcare system, because we have to trust people who have expertise, but we also have to know they don't know it all. So that was a good insight that I think people should watch that whole video. I think that was what led to a lot of misinformation. There was so many articles out there that were connecting the G6PD to his death. And I'm like, we watched the video. He said it was in 2015, and it took him 2 years to recover from what had happened to him. So that was kind of the message there. Gina has a question. She said, Doctor, could you just summarize G6PD and sickle cell complications, such effects? So here's one thing I'll share. Sometimes people will confuse G6PD with sickle cell. And, I think it's always important to realize that, like I said, one, knowing what genetic trait we inherit. Jaundice, here with G6PD, a trigger has to happen, right? With sickle cell disease, these people are already organically living with the condition. The triggers make it worse, but already dealing with that. So you might proactively see the jaundice in the eyes of a person with sickle cell and all of those different things. People with G6PD, when those triggers happen, that's when you tend to see a lot of those things too. I shared a story earlier, and I said, I remember a provider looked at me and said, hey, this is a patient that I will speculate that they have sickle cell disease. And the question I always ask them is, what if they have other genetic conditions? There are other conditions that have complications that look like sickle cell. So I always tell doctors, do a full workup on the patient. Do the genetic workup, figure out what's really wrong with them. That's the key factor there. So, Gina, to answer your question, complications of sickle cell is very, very different. Chronic, pain is kind of the cardinal symptom of sickle cell disease. People with G6PD, I think, is very trigger driven. Although you might see some of those jaundice and some of, hemolytic anemia, like we talked about, that people might associate there. I just said it, hemolytic anemia that people might associate with G6PD, but that hemolytic anemia is not happening most of the time until a trigger happens. People with sickle cell, your red blood cells are lasting only about 10 to 20 days. So they're always breaking down, need to recycle and make new red blood cells. So it's important for us to differentiate between that. Perpetual says, do we have a specific age for testing G6PD? There's never a specific age. At any age, you can always go back and get tested and know it. I say the best age is newborn because that tells a lot. And even a newborn, even at an older age, we can always get tested and know that. So, Gina, I'm looking at the hemolytic anemia question. Hopefully that helped answer your question. But that is when things are bad. When things are bad, hemolytic anemia, like PK said, man, some people eat that food that they're not supposed to take, the medicine they're not supposed to take. Those red blood cells are breaking up so fast, and you don't want that. And that's kind of what hemolytic anemia is. Can somebody have both sickle cell and G6PD? Yes, because those are two separate genes. People with sickle cell trait, it's when they have only one copy of the gene. I've seen people with sickle cell trait that have G6PD as well. Sickle cell disease, they might have G6PD as well. Although most of the time it's very, very rare, but it's not shocking if someone has both. Again, that's why it's important that people test. Great question, Liz.
All right. I think so. That's all the questions we have, right?
That's it. Yeah.
right.
I took all the ones in there. Gina's is very good session today. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you guys very much. So, Doc, finalize summarizing BBMI and sorry, Jimmy so.
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to say is yes, it's important that we know what genes we have. The one question I want everybody to have in the back pocket: anytime you go to a healthcare provider's office, always ask them whether you're giving a medicine, a test, whatever. Always ask: is there any type of people that shouldn't be taking this medicine or this type of test? That question alone can start a conversation that could probably even save your life. If you're not comfortable, you could share with the doctor, hey, doctor, I don't know all the things I inherit genetically. Is there anything I need to know about genetics that can impact this medicine? Most medicines, I should say not most, any approved medicine, there's information about all of that stuff too. So sometimes if we don't ask, we wouldn't know. So I think that's a question that however you want to ask it, just have it in the back pocket. Anytime you're with a healthcare provider, make sure you ask that question. And then number two, because of where most of us, I want to say, dare I say, all of us on this call, mostly from the African continent, there are some genetic conditions that we tend to inherit more so than others. And so it is important that we all become proactive. If you have any of these conditions that you may not be aware of, that we ask all these questions to at least know. I tell people anything, any ancestry, African origin, Caribbean origin, Mediterranean, you name it. There are some genetic conditions that places tend to have more or less. So it's important that we know that. And the last thing, whenever you see anybody, I think it's always important that we educate not just ourselves, but also educate others, family, friends, you name it, just so they also know their genotype too. So thank you all for today. Can blood transfusions exchange affect G6PD? People with G6PD sometimes actually might need a blood transfusion, Gina. Shockingly. Sometimes they do need a blood transfusion. So hopefully that helps. This is not the end of conversation. Like I share people that want to know your genotype or want to know some of your genetic stuff. We have a partnership with 23andMe that you can get a free test if you opt in. That's something that we take very seriously. If you want to, again, it's an option. You can always reach out to Sickle Cell 101 and we can help you give you one of those free tests to at least know. But at least if you don't know anything, just ask your doctors as well and they can tell you. So thank you everybody for today.
All right, Doc. Thanks so much. Director, can you please sign him out so that we can bring the show to an end? Director also. So director, are you busy? Maybe I'll cast a meeting or. All right, so are you busy there? Then A class. A class so I busy there. So Danny or Hodama, Danny, anyone, Uncle Jimmy.
For a better docase for such a wonderful year, dear my and then will be anyone near my baby. Yeah, that's a baby dog.
All right.
Thank you guys for having me.
No, thank you for coming. That's it. I'm sure son Uncle Jimmy kind at this point, yeah. The best region media so near hand it over. I'm touch up send Q&A session. This is the part that more Facebook than YouTube. I don't know. We're gonna be logging out at this point. We're gonna be signing. I want to say big thank you. The Zoom is still open. So if you're interested in the second part of the section, please log on Zoom and also contribute effectively in terms of any questions or concerns that you have concerning Tatop Send and how best we can maximize production. And I say, any customer service questions, this is the part that we're going to be running into. Next week, your topic now you'll be treating here: can a Christian be involved in active politics? So Christoni ubetimi do ho ahye active politics mo ana tiene also for Clifford also Pastor Dr. Clifford also Ajimai also Jemfi and the between kobo nti the Michelle for onya na onya so fedi nya na said that sene ye behwe say Christopher betimi be active politics mo ana I for one me will be involved. I don't enjoy the politics side of life, but then I feel if I said I couldn't any banners, I have to go serve my people. Why not? But Obibe Busa say, and now you're Christian, why should you think say Obeko party and uncle party way? And again, our next week program is not gonna be a party color based program. We don't do politics on this show, but rather we are talking about whether can Christians, so we're looking at the religious part of it and say, can Christians be involved into active politics? If so, why? If so, how can they go about it? If not, why can they do it? And that is what also for Pastor Dr. Clifford also Jemfi and Yebefemo next week. Into no Yebeja say na yakotata sem kinene Uncle Jim